The most surprising team in the Big 12 for me is BYU. Some of you might say Arizona State. I was not surprised Arizona State is going to be 3-0 entering Big 12 play, but BYU is that as well. Who had the Cougars and Sun Devils at 6-0 entering conference play on their bingo cards? Jake Hatch of Locked On BYU. Who had that?
I would say exactly nobody at this point. The biggest thing is both of those programs were considered to be programs that were going to struggle, but so far so good.
Yeah, it's been quite good. And I don't know how sustainable what each team is doing right now. It feels like they have got the moxie, they have got the culture, and that's what's winning them football games. I don't know if they have the high-end talent to continue, and we'll talk about BYU and Kansas State in the second half of this segment, but through 3 games, Jake, the big win at SMU, dominating Wyoming this past week amidst some challenging environment circumstances to be in over there in Laramie. Why is BYU undefeated?
Their defense. Their defense is allowing less than half of what they allowed a season ago in terms of overall points per game. They're averaging 14 points per game on defense. They have almost matched half of their sack output from a season ago. Really, Jay Hill and what he's endeavored to do with this BYU defense is completely remarkable. This is a team that a lot of those guys were part of that defense a season ago that was awful. It was sub 100 in a lot of categories. They brought him back, bet on continuity, added a few pieces to the defense, guys like Jack Kelly and Mark Collins, but it's paid off. And they've been absolutely dominant on the defensive side of the football, and that's been a big reason why they're 3-0.
What has Kalani Sitake's message been through the first 3 games that you think is resonating with his team? Is it that they were, not expected to do a whole heck of a lot? Is it just continuing the culture, getting back to, what they had in Provo in that 2021 season? Like, what is he doing that's clicking right now?
He's preaching toughness. That's the thing about this is a program a season ago that I think got a little down on themselves, and there were some off the field issues with players not being fully invested a season ago. This is a program that went back to the drawing board in the offseason. There were multiple videos that came out of strength and conditioning coaches saying, "Hey, you guys want to go 5-7 again? Keep doing what you're doing." Essentially, they were told, if you guys want to be a better team, you got to put in the time, you got to put in the effort. And so far, they have shown that their culture, the overall toughness, it is absolutely leveled up this season.
One of the reasons that I and many others were not particularly high on BYU coming into this year was, they struggled last year, but you're in a deep quarterback conference, and Jake Ratz kind of leaves something to be desired. What have you seen from the Cougars quarterback so far?
He's still hot and cold. There are still turnover issues. You look at that SMU game where he had 2 interceptions and a fumble loss that obviously almost cost BYU in that matchup. But the one thing in that SMU game, for example, that I saw is that even with those turnover issues he had, which had BYU fans irate, he came back, drove the Cougars down the field twice late in that game to get the points necessary to win that game. He is showing a bounce back ability this season that I think is going to benefit BYU. Are there still going to be issues at times of him having that gunslinger mentality where he's going to try and fit a pass into a window that he's not supposed to? Yeah, I think so. But I think if he continues to kind of work his way towards being the quarterback BYU envisions he can become, he is going to play a big role in BYU's chances of getting to bowl eligibility and beyond this season. They need him to be playing at a higher level. Currently, he's trending towards about 3,400 yards passing, about 28 touchdowns and roughly 12 interceptions. And those aren't necessarily gaudy numbers, but those would be, I think, numbers enough that would help BYU get to at least 6 wins if he can continue the pace he's on.
Jake, are you telling me that fans of a college football team were rabidly upset, probably in the online space, when the quarterback was committing turnovers? Is this what you're breaking to me? I've never heard of this before.
Well, let's put it this way. Jake Ratzloff was the highest rated Big 12 quarterback at PFF this past week after his performance against Wyoming. If you were to pay attention to the discourse online amongst most BYU fans, you would think he was 16th on that list. There is like this disconnect of how well he's playing versus what the perception is of him as a quarterback amongst BYU fans. So yeah, they've got there's an interesting dynamic playing out, but you're right. Fan bases, they're nothing if not irrational at times.
No, that's why we love them, sort of. Let's talk about this upcoming game because this to me is a prove it game for BYU and at some level for Kansas State. Can you go on the road? This is one of the top Big 12 teams that will come into Lavelle Edwards Stadium this year. Oklahoma State will show up in the month of October as well. So there are going to be some big home games for BYU, but this is the first one because you're 3-0 and that looks great, and it is great. You dominated Wyoming. I forget who they even played week one. It was
Southern Illinois.
Okay. I'm going to let that speak for itself. Week 2, though, you went on the road and you beat an SMU team that some saw as maybe a dark horse contender in the ACC. I think it's clear the Mustangs are not that, but they're still a capable program and team coming into this year with a returning head coach and quarterback and some weapons, and BYU kind of forced them into having some quarterback issues because of how the defense played in that football game. But when you look at this Kansas State game, I think this is a massive opportunity for BYU to say, hey, this is not some fluky 3-0 week schedule start. We're here to push towards the upper half of the Big 12 conference. You have to win this football game, but the opportunity is right in front of you.
Yeah, if BYU wants to legitimize the 3-0 in most people's eyes, go and beat Kansas State. That is a team that I would actually make people sit up and say, hold on. What did BYU just do? I think it's a legitimizing type win if they can pull it off. Now, that's much easier said than done because this is a Kansas State squad that is going to come into Provo fully expecting to roll out of Provo with a victory.
When you look at this Kansas State team, number one thing that stands out, they're going to run the football. Yeah. They're going to run the football. They're going to run the football, and they're going to keep on running the football. Avery Johnson looks like Lamar Jackson out there in more ways than one. He moves easily. He's explosive. He's dynamic. They're going to run him a lot. He can make some throws, and then he will throw it into the stands to the hot girl in row 3, as Drake Tola, Locked On Big 12, told us earlier on this particular show. How do the Cougars match up against this Kansas State team at a glance, particularly the rushing attack?
The first thing is shut down the run as much as they can. They've been actually very good at slowing down rushing attacks. Speaking of the running backs this season, the concern I've got, Spencer, is the QB run game where these quarterbacks that scramble, and Avery Johnson's among the best in the entire country at it, have been really kind of the big bugaboo for BYU on defense. They have absolutely gashed BYU at times in all 3 games to date. So I think the bigger thing for BYU is they got to work on their QB spy package. A guy like Isaiah Glass, who's been an absolute revelation, a linebacker this year for BYU, 6'5", with sideline-to-sideline ability to run with a guy like Avery Johnson. I think you essentially just tell him, you find Avery Johnson and you make sure he doesn't get loose, and BYU has to be very disciplined in their pass rush. They got to stay in their lanes, contain Avery Johnson. If they do that, I think they'll give themselves a fighting chance.
When you look at BYU's offense, Jake, what do they have to accomplish in this football game? I'd look at Retzlaff and say, you got to protect the football, because if you turn the ball over against this Kansas State team, look how that went for Arizona last week. Curious that this is going to be a really fun game, I think, for Kansas State. I think they're going to get more of a challenge this week against BYU than Arizona gave them in Manhattan a week ago. It's your first conference road game. BYU's riding high. Crowd's going to be on fire. On paper, coming into the year, a lot of people would have said, well, Arizona's going to give you a tougher game. Arizona's better. And I look at this and go, well, they beat Arizona 31-7. What does the offense need to do to have more success than the Wildcats did last week?
Number one thing is find better options in the run game than they have right now. The simple fact of the matter is 3 of the top 4 running backs for BYU have injury issues right now. LJ Martin, their starter, got injured against SMU. Same with Hinckley Rapati. Neither one of them played against Wyoming last week. The thought was that Enoch Nawahine would step into that role. He didn't play against Wyoming, and Kalani Sitake admitted after the game he's banged up. So that leaves you with Miles Davis and a freshman return missionary in Pokai Haunga. The good news is Haunga came in late in that game against Wyoming and averaged 7 yards per pop. Can he extrapolate that over more than 5 carries? We'll find out. But they absolutely have to be able to balance this offense and be able to run the ball on Kansas State. Now, 3 of your top 4 running backs, if they're unable to go, that doesn't bode well for BYU to do that. But I think you tell your offensive line, led by guys like Connor Pay and Caleb Etienne, you guys absolutely have to get the job done, because if you don't, we're going to have a very, very tough time moving the ball consistently down the field.
Stop me if you've heard this one before, folks. The ground game is going to decide who wins the football game.
Well, and I'll also add this. BYU in Lavelle Edwards Stadium is absolutely about as raucous as it gets after dark. I look at that Kansas State game when they went to Tulane a couple of weeks ago, and it was like 25,000 and change, and Kansas State looked a little bit rattled. 63,000 people in LaVell Edwards Stadium is going to be even louder than it was at Tulane. So I think that the juice that the BYU fan base will give BYU after the return home after 2 straight road games, that could be another edge for BYU, because Kansas State's going to come in and be like, wow, these people are absolutely nuts. And the best part is they're stone cold sober to boot.
Jake Hatch, locked on BYU. Jake, appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime, my man.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.